A Poison Tree by William Blake. I was angry with my friend. I told my wrath. My wrath did end. I was angry with my foe. I told it not. My wrath did grow. And I watered it in fears, night and morning with my tears. And I sunned it with smiles, and with soft, deceitful wiles. And it grew both day and night, till it bore an apple bright. And my foe beheld it shine, and he knew that it was mine, and into my garden stole, when the night had veiled the pole. In the morning glad I see my foe outstretched beneath the tree. I'm Holly.
I'm Leslie.
And
we would be dead.
Leslie.
Hey, Holly.
Hey, Fiends. Woo, we're back, and we have a dramatic one this week.
I'm so excited.
So am I. I hope you enjoyed our rebroadcast of our vampire episode.
I did.
I always do. I actually love that one. It was really fun.
Yeah, me too.
And it was a live show at one point, too.
Yep.
So for the few of you that came to see it, thank you very much. We liked doing it. Also, it occurred to me that after Nosferatu came out, suddenly everybody was talking about vampires.
Oh, that was such a good movie.
I still haven't seen it, and I'm upset about it.
You need to go. Maybe I'll go with you. I'd see it again.
Go with me.
It's so good.
I did see Sonic 3, though, so, I got that going for me.
It's like a grotesque, sexy, weirdly sexy, but grotesque time.
Which is totally appropriate.
Yeah.
If you listen to our episode about vampires, you'll agree.
Yeah.
But anyway, this week we're back, and this episode is dramatic. And I don't mean dramatic as in it is upsetting. I mean dramatic as in this is high drama.
Yes. We are bringing the drama.
Like stage drama. It's wild. This case has it all. Money, accents, love affairs, and a murder most foul. Which is why this case is also very famous. And technically unsolved.
Okay.
But we'll see about how we feel about that at the end of this episode. Today, we are tackling the murder at the Priory. And for those of us who don't live in the neighborhood, it's also the mysterious death of Charles Bravo, which is inarguably one of the most amazing names I have ever heard.
Yeah.
And sometimes I will be upgrading this name by calling him Charlie Bravo.
Ooh.
Because I am who I am and I can't help myself.
There you go.
Did he go by Charlie? I don't know, but it sounds like a zillionaire secret agent and I'm into it. Yeah. The mystery of who killed Charlie Bravo has captured the minds of both armchair and career detectives, as well as numerous true crime authors for over a century.
Wow.
But why? Well, there are thousands of unsolved murders all over the globe every single year. We can't possibly talk about every single one. So what is it about this one that has people hooked? In a word, intrigue. And by that I mean that this story plays out like a game of Clue and features at least 3 alternate endings.
So exciting.
Yeah. You know the end where Tim Curry's like running around. He's like, and then they were in this room, and then they did this. It's a lot like that. This case has everything and a side of unhinged Victorian pseudoscience. So tighten up your corsets and starch those high collars because this week we are getting old-timey.
So are we gonna like we make this into a movie?
It is a movie.
Is
Several movies and books and TV shows. It is famous.
I've never heard of it. I mean, I've never heard of a lot of things.
The title is never the same in more than one place.
Okay.
But it is the subject of several books and a couple movies. So
have you heard of it?
You
didn't hear of it,
no,
right?
I had not.
We were discussing.
Yeah, no, I had never heard of this one, even though
Where have we been?
I don't know, because most of these I have read at least a little bit about, and this one I was like,
this seemed like right up our alley.
It has everything that we like. It's old. There's poison. It's lady centric. It's like I don't know where we were. But guys, it's no secret that I love old-timey cases.
Yeah.
And any case that gives me the opportunity to quote the phrase, "What poisoning was seen as a woman's pursuit," is truly a triple bonus score. I am bright-eyed and bushy-tailed this week. But, and guys, this is just for our listeners, Leslie, just check out for a minute.
Okay.
I'm a little worried about Leslie. She's had a cold for like weeks. See? And the baby had a cold, and I don't think she's sleeping. And I hate to say this, but she's not really looking her best. And I know she's tried every remedy she could get her hands on. And as an outside observer, I hate to say it, but nothing's really worked. But Leslie,
yeah.
I have heard about a magical remedy that I think you may have heard of, but haven't yet tried. Can you guess what it is?
Oh, what, are you not feeling well this week? I guess you're looking a little.
Yeah. It's definitely for me. What do you think it is? Maybe just a little bit of
yeah, I guess we can still do it.
Okay.
I mean, I think that we're actually looking great this week.
Yeah, but why don't you tell them what it is? What is that ingredient?
Well, it's just, I guess, a little bit of validation. A hill worth dying on.
I really like how extra it was this week.
I'm bringing the drama.
High drama. I love it. And Leslie, best of all, our fiends can give us this precious ingredient totally free of charge.
That's amazing. I mean, I don't really think I need it.
Of course not.
This week. I feel like they've been doing a great job. But, I mean, we'll always take more.
Yeah.
An overflow, really.
But how? You must be asking yourselves. Well, I will tell you. Simply head on over to Spotify or Apple Podcasts and leave us a 5-star rating and or a friendly review. It really is the only way to move this podcast forward. Ratings and reviews equal attention, attention equals support, and support equals more and better content for all of you. But if you just can't wait for more We Would Be Dead in your life, don't worry, you don't have to.
How?
You can support us over on Patreon. Cookie Monster, I'm so glad you came.
I'm sorry. I've got something's up with me.
Little tickle.
Yeah.
It's very dry in here. It's fine.
Sure. Yeah.
Over on Patreon, for just a few dollars a month, you will gain access to our entire catalog of 30-minute horror movies, our special mini-sodes, our weekly after-show Host Mortem, which is available in both video and audio formats. Maybe you want to see our faces. Maybe you don't. Both are okay. You'll also get a special gift in the mail from us, the opportunity to participate in some giveaways. You'll get merch deals, an on-air toast dedicated just to you, and more.
So exciting.
Yeah, and St. Patrick's Day is coming up, so everyone should have toast shirts.
Yeah.
Just saying.
Yeah.
Maybe we can do a little giveaway with one of those.
Okay.
Maybe. I just thought of it right now. Look for it.
I'll see if we have any.
Yeah, exactly. We also have more exclusive content in the works for you, our beloved patrons. But if you have anything you'd like to see, never hesitate to ask. In all honesty, we are here thanks to our patrons. So come on over and be part of the We Would Be Dead family.
That's exciting.
It
now,
is.
Holly, what if I don't have any money?
Well, then you can just leave us a review.
Okay.
Or if all of that is a little too much for you, you can simply follow us on social media. We are at Would Be Dead Pod anywhere and everywhere you get your content. You can like our posts, share our posts, like and share our posts.
Okay.
That's almost as good as money.
Sure.
You can leave us a comment, post about your favorite episode. Let us know when you're listening. Tell a friend. Tell a neighbor. Tell your favorite wealthy widow. Every neighborhood needs one of those.
Oh.
And you just know she's wearing one of those fabulous I Killed My Husband robes and swirling a martini, smoking a Virginia Slim.
Ooh.
What's her name?
Cassandra.
Do we not have a Cassandra?
I don't know. Like a Cassie? Like a Cassandra? I don't
know. She feels like one of our swamp witch people, possibly.
I wouldn't name a swamp witch Cassandra, would I?
I don't know. I don't remember.
That Zoya?
I don't know.
I think that was Zoya.
We have so many now. Well, they can have the same name. People in this world have the same name.
I don't know. I don't have a Cassandra currently.
Okay. Well, then your friends and Cassandra, the wealthy widow, can become fiends, and we can all hang out together. I genuinely want to hang out with this one.
Yeah.
You know she has, tons of extra money and the best alcohol.
Yeah.
Love her.
Or Tammy.
Tammy's also a good one.
I don't know why.
It's a very,
Tammy just fit in.
Yeah, I can see that. Sammy and Cassandra, they're best friends. They're wealthy widows. They have great fashion sense.
Sure, yeah.
They're a little questionable in their morals, but we like it.
Mm-hmm.
Good.
Okay.
Let them be our fiends. Well, I think that's all I have in the way of news right now before we begin. Leslie, do you have anything to add?
No, I don't think so. Sorry, my brain's been really foggy this week. I don't know if you know,
so
but
weird.
I was not feeling well last week.
Oh, I can't tell at all.
Yeah.
Oh, you know what?
I'm doing a little better. Yeah.
Next week, we just figured out is our 200th episode.
Well, what do you know?
That's like a huge, awesome deal that we did not notice until right now. So maybe we'll do something fun next week. I don't know.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll see. Our anniversary is coming up too, that we have more time to plan for.
Sure, yeah. 5 years, right? 5?
4, I think.
4. Didn't we do 4 last year?
I don't remember.
This is 5, 2025.
That's wild. Holy shit. I guess so.
We're going into our 5th
We're going
year.
into our 5th year.
So is that right?
I think it technically means we are closing. We're 4. I think we've done 2 4s. It's fine. We're bad at counting. Don't worry about it.
You know, some people do their birthdays that way.
My grandmother did.
Yeah.
That's insane. Why are you acting like you're older than you are?
Yeah.
That's wild to me. Anyway, we are closing our 4th year and entering our 5th this coming February. And I think what I want to do is another gross love episode because that was our first episode. So we'll see what kind of gross love we can find.
Okay. Let's just do it again.
If you guys want to hear us redo Carl Tanzler, you let me know. We've learned a thing or two since we started, so whatever. Anyway.
We should just see the play and then discuss.
No, that's Elmer McCurdy.
Didn't we find out that they
Oh, yes, there's also a Carl Tanzler musical. Just about everything is a musical if you look it up long enough.
Maybe we'll make this into a musical.
Maybe. I think it is a musical.
Right. Well, we should be doing it.
I want a shirt that says everything is a musical if you look it up long enough.
This year I'm going to take voice lessons.
Okay.
We're going to do a musical.
I can't wait. I love a musical. Okay. And I said I wanted to write more fiction. So anyway, all right then. On with the show.
This would be nonfiction.
But I want to write fiction anyway.
Okay. On with the show.
On with the show. April 18th, 1876. Signs of spring had begun to show their face in Belem, a little town in southwest London. But the nights were still cold. The Priory, a large Gothic revival villa set back from the road, looked more like a small sleeping castle than a private home. But then I suppose that was the idea. On this particular night, at this particular hour, most of the town's residents were warm and cozy in their beds or drawing rooms. Fires lit, dinners finished, 10 o'clock, and all is well.
All is well.
Pretty soon, all is not well.
Oh, no.
I still need that shirt real bad.
Okay. I'm working on it.
Suddenly, a noise from the Priory broke the sleepy silence. Mr. Charles Bravo began to scream. Startled by the sound, just like that, the Bravo's maid, Marianne, ran up the stairs to see what had happened. There, she found Mr. Bravo standing at his bedroom door in his dressing gown. He was pale, sweating profusely, and screaming for his wife to get him hot water. But she couldn't hear him. That night, his wife Florence had chosen to sleep in her own room across the hall. She had suffered a miscarriage a few weeks earlier and hadn't been feeling well. I know, sad. After dinner, she'd gone upstairs and had a glass of Marsala wine and went to sleep. She asked her housekeeper and companion, Mrs. Cox, to stay the night with her, which was not uncommon when she wasn't feeling well. And Mrs. Cox was sitting in a chair by her bedside, quietly knitting, much like Leslie is right now.
I am knitting.
It's true. Hot water, Florence, Charles Bravo screamed. Marianne ran down the hall and knocked on Florence's door. Mrs. Cox answered and went out to tend to the matter, hoping she would not have to wake Florence for whatever her husband was going on about. Men can be such babies. He probably just had a chill.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I know.
Mrs. Cox rushed into Charles's bedroom, announcing that she was there and saying he needn't bother Florence. She was there to get him whatever he needed. But she found him leaning out of the third-floor window and violently vomiting onto the roof below.
Oh, my goodness.
Disgusting. Was that common? You just leaned out the window and threw up? This is not medieval times. They had stuff.
Well, this is why you Remember, this is why the ladies would always walk on the inside of the road and the
I
men would be
guess,
on the
yeah.
outside.
But this
because
wasn't
people would
in.
just be flinging things out their windows.
But this is like an outside of town estate. It's
Yeah.
not in like the dirty streets of London.
Right.
And they had bathrooms.
Yeah, but he couldn't make it there,
No,
Holly.
he just leaned out the window.
Yeah.
The worst part is that like there was like that lower roof below because the second floor went out further than the third.
Yeah.
And he was just straight onto their own roof.
Yeah.
So gross.
Don't shame the man.
Oh, don't
He
worry.
couldn't get there.
You're okay to shame this guy. Trust me. Charles Bravo then turned around, looked at Mrs. Cox, and fainted.
Oh.
Definitely a little more than a man cold, but you know. Mary Ann, the other maid, stood terrified in the doorway, and Mrs. Cox told her to run down to the kitchen and fetch her some hot coffee and mustard.
Okay.
She said they needed to help Mr. Bravo get out the rest of whatever was making him sick, which is a common concept in Victorian medicine. You could purge everything out of your system.
Right.
Apparently, good thing to help you throw up is a cup of coffee full of mustard, and I don't disagree.
Oh.
Yup. Mrs. Cox sat down beside him, rubbed his chest, and waited for the awful concoction to arrive. When Mary Ann returned, they poured the mustardy coffee down his throat, and sure enough, Mr. Bravo began to vomit again, but this time into a basin because a woman was there, which, when he was finished, Mrs. Cox sent another servant to go wash out. Then she sent another member of the household staff, because these are rich people, to fetch Florence's personal physician, Dr. Harrison, who lived a few miles away as the crow flies. But this was dark time. It was dark at night, and they didn't have like street lights or anything. And they're not in a car, they're in a horse-drawn carriage. So this particular ride there and back could take an hour or more before they, got back to take care of Charles.
And they had no crows to fly there.
No crows flying there, just a horse and a carriage. So after they had sent someone to fetch Dr. Harrison, Mary Ann ran to wake up Florence. But she was already awake when she got there because, this was a lot of commotion. Florence sat up in bed.
She was probably so bothered. What is going on out there?
I know. She was kind of just like, what's wrong? What's happening? And after Mary Ann got out that Charles was sick, Florence ran into his room and started to panic because it was clear that the situation at this point was dire. Charles was pale and completely unconscious. He was drenched in sweat and vomit, and it just looked bad. Florence collapsed to the floor by her husband's side, sobbing, and asked if they had sent for a doctor. When Mrs. Cox said that she had sent for Dr. Harrison, Florence was shocked. They didn't have time to wait for Dr. Harrison. It didn't matter if he was their regular doctor, so Florence sent someone else to get to the closest possible doctor and fast. Anyone who was awake would do. Which she thought was what the first reaction should be. She was kind of confused as to why they had sent for someone further away.
Right. Mrs. Cox done fucked up.
Did she? We don't know. Dr. Joseph Moore of Balham was the first to arrive. He lived the closest, and his prognosis was not good. Just before midnight, Dr. Harrison rushed into the priory, so it did take them an hour and a half to get him. And his findings were the same. It seemed as though Charles Bravo had been poisoned. Dun, dun, dun.
My.
Now, they couldn't tell right away what substance had been used or how it was administered, but they were certain of one thing. It was definitely poison. Florence couldn't believe what she was hearing. Surely they must be mistaken. No one had been in the house that day except for her, Charles, and the staff.
And the thousands of staff members.
I know, right?
Nobody has been here. It's just been the two of us.
And the stable boys.
The other 100 people.
The stable boys don't even come inside.
They're stable boys.
They are. We'll talk about them later.
Oh, there are stable boys.
There are stable boys.
Yay.
Well, then, the doctors thought, it must have been one of them. I know. It would take Charles Bravo 2 more agonizing days to finally surrender. So he took a really long, painful time to die, and he was awake for a lot of it. And the investigation of his slow yet startling death made the front page of every single newspaper. Who killed Charles Bravo? Was it his beautiful wife Florence, the wealthy former widow? Was it Mary Ann, the maid, or Mrs. Cox, the kindly housekeeper? Perhaps it was a disgruntled co-worker, a lover, or maybe it was Charles himself. Officially, nobody knows. But let's see if we can figure it out.
Okay.
We shall start with a beautiful young woman named Florence Campbell. For if I'm being honest, this is really her story. Florence was born on September 5th, 1845, in what was then the Australian British colony of New South Wales.
Fun fact, New South Wales under British rule was originally a prison colony.
Mhm.
An even funner fact, I had family members sent there
Oh,
for stealing horses.
there you go.
Yeah. So, good day, fam.
Were they stable boys?
No, they just took them. They just
Oh.
took those horses and ran. And then they sent them to Australia.
Aw.
And they might still be there, that branch of our family. Most likely, because if you were sent to go to prison in
Yeah.
Australia, you probably didn't have money to come back when you were done.
Right.
So you were just there forever, which was the plan. In 1845, however, New South Wales was no longer a giant open-air jail for British degenerates. It had become a proper colony. And Florence was not, nor had she ever been, a prisoner. She was the eldest daughter of land speculator, merchant, and future politician Robert Tertius Campbell.
Ooh, of Campbell soup?
No,
Okay.
if only. But this case is full of good names. And his wife, Anne.
You know, I too read that line somewhere and I
Yeah.
just thought it was so funny.
Oh, Anne.
At least she gets a name, but it just sounds funny, like, and Anne. And you're like, well, I mean, I guess it would be Anne Campbell. Like, you didn't need to write it, but.
and mother and
Yeah.
wife, no name. Yeah. Those titles mean that Robert Tertius was eventually a politician, but first and foremost, he bought and sold land and goods. But not just any goods. Robert Campbell amassed quite a fortune by buying and selling gold.
Ooh, at least it wasn't people this time.
No, not this time. But gold, like that's top tier, man. He was
Yeah.
making money. In 1852, the Campbells and all their money, their 8 children, and their governess and 3 servants moved to England.
Wow.
A lot of people on a boat. Boat fare alone means that they have money.
Yeah.
In 1859, Robert purchased a large estate in Berkshire called Busket Park.
I think it's called the Berkshires.
I think that's here.
Oh.
And there they stayed, becoming members of the social elite.
Mm.
Yes. As such, Florence enjoyed the finest upbringing imaginable. From an early age, she took elocution lessons, not electrocution, elocution.
Elocution.
Yes. Elocution is, quote, the study of formal speaking in pronunciation, grammar, style, and tone, as well as the idea and practice of effective speech and its forms. She also studied French and German. Florence would have been able to hold her own at any ball or formal dinner party. And in her free time, she enjoyed needlepoint and spending time with the animals, especially the horses.
Yes.
Which makes sense because she has real horse girl energy. If you know, you know. Now, by the time she came of age, Florence Campbell was a well-known heiress and quite a catch. When she was 18, while on a family vacation in Canada, which always strikes me as a little bit weird. You live in England, you have tons of money, and they're like, you know where we're going to go? Canada. Okay. Florence met 20-year-old British officer Alexander Ricardo. Alexander happened to be stationed at the Royal Military College there, and he also happened to be the grandnephew of, get ready for a lot of people, economist David Ricardo, the only son of International Telegraph Company founder John L. Ricardo, who had served as a member of Parliament for Stoke-on-Trent, where the Birches, my family, are from. Are we in this case? We might be. I don't know.
Oh, man. Are you part?
I don't know. Maybe.
Could you have done it?
I don't know. And Alexander Ricardo was also the nephew of James Duff, the 5th Earl of Fife.
Ooh.
Earl of Fife is a great title.
Sure.
So.
Was he related to Ricky Ricardo?
No, and he's not in any way like Latin or anything. He's Scottish. His family's from Scotland. They moved to Australia and then England.
Okay.
Counterintuitive. But if you're keeping tabs, all the mamas would have been swooning over this possible match. So much money, so many titles.
Yeah, wow.
Florence and Alexander entertained a brief courtship before tying the knot on September 21st, 1864. The Campbells threw them a lavish wedding at Busket Park, which was the talk of the town. And you know they invited the press.
Oh, for sure.
Local newspapers called their marriage, quote, the union of 2 great families of Europe.
Bigger than the Kardashians.
They would have been now, which also is like the most generic quote.
Yeah.
You guys are great and you got married. Well done. Okay.
Good job.
And then I assume they talked about like her dress and the food or something, but
Sure.
whatever. After returning from their German honeymoon, Florence and Alexander settled back in England in the West Country. Florence received a generous marriage settlement of £1,000 a year from her father, which doesn't seem like much, but in today's currency, it would be approximately £155,000 or roughly $189,000 per year.
Right.
Which, considering Alexander's substantial wealth, was just icing on the cake.
Mm-hmm.
And I bet it was like an amazing cake. Can you even imagine what it must have been like to be a rich young wifey back then?
Oh, I think about it every day.
I mean, sure, her face cream and wallpaper were probably full of arsenic, but think of the dresses.
Ugh.
They must have been wonderful.
Yes.
Leslie, I feel like you might know a little bit of something about a rich Victorian wifey.
Oh, do I?
And
I
her
think about it daily.
Daily routine.
Yes.
It feels like something you would know.
Yeah.
Why don't you tell us a little bit about what Florence might have done or worn or felt?
Oh, sure. So let's just go through her day.
Oh, I'm
a
excited.
Typical day.
Please do.
All right. So in the early morning, she'd wake up. This would be around 8 or 9 a.m.
Mm-hmm.
And she'd begin her day being attended by a maid who would help her get dressed in an elegant morning gown.
Well, we know she had a staff, so.
Sure. Mm-hmm. And that, probably would take up at least 30 minutes of getting into
Oh,
that
at the very
gown.
least. Got to lace it all up
Yes.
and stuff.
And then that was just kind of her time in the morning.
Sure.
So you just get a nice hour to yourself. Half of it's putting on the gown.
Right.
But the other half, you might write a little letter, or you might read a letter, or you're just kind of having me time, staring at yourself in a mirror, maybe.
Yeah.
Brushing your hair.
Think of all the different kinds of letters.
Sure. Yeah. But just kind of nobody's concerned about you. It's just you.
It's fine. Yeah.
And then you'd have breakfast. And this would typically be around 10 a.m., maybe 11 a.m. And breakfast was often quite an affair, served in the dining room, included tea, toast, eggs, and other light items.
So light.
So light. And she might continue to read some letters there. Or newspapers during that time. Okay?
Okay.
Then she has some more personal time after breakfast.
Thinking about letters.
And these mornings were spent pursuing leisurely or self-improving activities, right? So she might practice some music, maybe the piano or a harp, or painting or sketching, or reading literature,
Thinking
or
about the
studying
letter of the day.
languages, because she loved languages.
She did
and
know
her
a few
own
languages.
language, right?
Mm-hmm.
And she might take a stroll in the estate gardens if it was a nice day.
She did have a garden.
Yes, well, there you go.
Mm-hmm.
And then she would do some household management. If she was the lady of the house, she might meet with the housekeeper or butler to discuss menus, budget, or household events. They'd have a nice little meeting.
Just I want this for dinner.
Yes.
And please buy me some more bonbons.
Yes.
And I need a new chicken.
And maybe there were issues with, the housekeepers. She handled some drama too. She'd have to be in control of what's going on with the people that worked for them as well.
Marjorie sleeping with the stable boys.
Yeah.
All of them.
We need to move her.
Mm-hmm. Ugh, Marjorie.
She can't be cleaning the cow poop anymore.
Someone write her a letter.
Yeah. Oh, I'll do that.
Dearest Marjorie.
But it'll have to wait till morning because I'm done writing letters now.
Right, of course. That's morning work.
Yeah.
Okay.
We're moving into midday now.
Yes,
Holly.
yes.
So this is the time that is reserved for social calls or visits. And typically, this would depend on what time your home did its meals. So what time it had breakfast and what time it had dinner. And so on average, most homes ate breakfast at 10 and dinner at 5. But sometimes it could shift a little bit, right?
Mm-hmm.
So typically between 11 and maybe 5 p.m. or say 11 or 5 p.m., you might have visitors come in. But to be sure, in case you weren't familiar with that household, it was really noon to 3 was the safe zone to go visit people.
Would you have a little tea or something?
Sometimes. So also something I learned, which I thought was funny because this will take it back to anybody that loves Pride and Prejudice.
Oh, Lord.
I think it was in that one. Any Jane Austen.
Mm-hmm.
but typically the length of a visit would be around 15 minutes. And
that's so short.
It would be 15 to 30 minutes, but it would be quick little visits. Sometimes, if you were expecting somebody, you might be doing a lunch with them. But if you were just popping in, maybe it was a gentleman caller or something like that. But it would be 15 minutes. And I feel like Jane Austen wrote something once and I didn't get it until this time, but it was a funny thing about, I don't know if it was the woman. I don't know, but they like only went to visit for 14 minutes, and that was supposed to be like shade to the guy.
I need
and
to
now
leave.
I get why that was so funny.
I also read an essay about a Jane Austen novel where they sussed out that breakfast was for pores. A lot of times if you had like a hearty breakfast, it's because you worked.
Oh, yeah,
So
yeah,
if you, or no, it was the time of your breakfast was
Yeah.
for like poor people and your hearty breakfast. So if you were having a big breakfast at like 8 o'clock, you were
Yeah.
working class.
Yes.
But if
Yep.
you were having like a little jam on a cookie at
Mhm.
10, then you were rich.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it was light items.
Yeah, you
Okay.
didn't need like ham and eggs.
So visitors would come, or social calls would come late morning to early afternoon, often reserved for socializing. She might receive visitors in the drawing room, serving tea and engaging in polite conversation. She might make visits to friends, neighbors, or family, often staying for tea or lunch. And then this was also a time when they would do like charitable work. So many heiresses were involved in philanthropy. And this would include organizing charity events, visiting the poor, or contributing to local causes.
In her 3-hour window in
In
which she
her-
also visited people and had lunch.
Well, so again, this was midday. So maybe she wouldn't have any social calls that day. So that might take up several hours.
So she could give 45 minutes to the poor.
Yes.
Perfect.
Mm-hmm. And then in the afternoon, this is just midday.
Right.
So now we're in the afternoon.
It's like when Beth and Little Women went to take care of people with scarlet fever.
Yeah.
Bad call.
Yeah.
Anyway.
So the afternoon is reserved for more leisure activities again.
Oh, thank God. I'm exhausted.
So she could be riding her horses, because we know she's a horse
She did ride
girl.
horses, yes.
Her horse girl.
She is that.
Say it. A horse girl. Or walking in the countryside, playing lawn games like croquet or archery, shopping for clothes or trinkets in town, and reading novels or writing letters. She can write her letters again.
All right, Marjorie, here we go.
And then there'd be an afternoon tea. So we know about high noon tea. That's around 4 or 5 p.m. And this was a central ritual. It was both a social event and a light meal with tea, sandwiches, and pastries. Oh, I love a pastry.
I love tea.
I do too.
Ugh. A million little
I don't
sandwiches.
know why we don't just do that. That should be our show.
It's
Talk murders, and we'll have high noon tea. And we'll just have those 3 tiers of like little scones and biscuits. And
like the lemon curd and the clotted cream. So good.
Some pastries. Oh, I love a Danish.
Who doesn't?
Anyway. Okay. And then the evening happens.
Okay. I hope she's taking a rest.
She's had a day. Yeah. So early evening involved changing into formal attire. Because remember, at this point, she was just like in her morning wear.
I'm so jealous. I wish I had to put on a formal dress every night.
You can. Nobody's stopping you.
It would be crazy.
You're an adult. You do what you want.
My family would take me away.
Okay. Absolutely not. They don't do that anymore, Holly.
Okay.
It's fine. So dressing was an elaborate process, often with the help of a lady's maid or 12. And then you'd go to dinner. So you worked up a sweat
in your own home.
Basically your workout. Yeah. And then you're like, now I'm hungry.
Mm-hmm.
So you'd, pat away the sweat.
Mm-hmm.
And then you'd go to dinner, which was another grand affair, especially if you were having guests. And it consisted of multiple courses, fine wines, and lively conversation. Or maybe it was just you and Charles Bravo.
On the end of each end of a long table, staring at each other.
Exactly. Like Beauty and the Beast.
Exactly.
And then there'd be evening entertainment. So now you've eaten and now you retire into the game room or wherever, right? And so you'd play cards or board games. You would engage in music, singing performances, reading aloud, maybe your letters, discussing books and ideas, attending or hosting balls, parties, or theater performances, right? So
I do
fun.
hope Marjorie will play the harpsichord.
I do hope so. And now we retire for the night.
Good night.
It's bedtime. And the day ended with retiring to your chambers. And she might read, pray, or reflect before going to bed.
In a letter.
Often in a luxurious room befitting her wealth.
Perfect.
Yes.
Dear Marjorie, I'm sorry about the earlier drama. Good night.
Yes. So as a recap, for most heiresses of this time, the key themes in their life for the day would be social obligations, leisure and refinement, marriage prospects, but she was already married, so she didn't need to deal with that, and dependence on staff. So
Why isn't that my life?
I don't know, man. I don't know.
Wow.
I like that they had this little, one of the sites had like this little asterisk almost. While an heiress's life might seem idyllic, it was also bound by societal expectations and pressures to fulfill her role as a perfect lady. Oh, how boo-hoo.
It's so hard. Think of Marjorie, okay?
Just, Marjorie.
She's having a terrible time. All the stable boys dumped her. It's awful. Well.
But no, we know it's a hard life.
We do. The pressure. Oh.
Okay.
Man. Sounds like everything's really working out pretty well for our girl Flo.
I was going to say,
not too bad.
Seems like a good time.
But this story isn't about Alexander Ricardo and her life with him. Oh. It's about Charlie Bravo.
Wait, that's right.
Uh-huh. And we haven't even met him yet.
Wow.
So needless to say, the idyllic life of Florence Campbell Ricardo didn't stay that way forever. Just 7 months into their brand new marriage, 7 months,
wow.
Florence went to speak with her father. She said that she and Alexander were constantly at odds. She wanted a big family, but Alexander was, at this point, a captain in the Grenadier Guards, which is an elite branch of the British Canadian Army. It sounds more like a fun little branch. Like, they don't do much. They're just the guards. But it's not. They are not like managerial desk jobby people. They are active, elite, fighting soldiers.
Okay.
Just 9 years earlier, they had fought in the Crimean War. And this was at a point in time where Florence would have been aware of that. So she was terrified that her new husband and hopefully the father of her future children could be called away to battle and killed at a moment's notice. Because wars happened like whenever. His military career was busy and left him little time to be at home.
Florence, little time to have sex.
Exactly.
Little time to make babies.
Or after doing that, he wasn't home at all. It was just like, get it in and leave.
Yeah, but what did they do? What did men do at that point with kids?
They didn't do anything with the kids, but they were at least like, they strolled around with their leisurely wives.
Sure.
You know, they sat at the end of the table like the beast and had dinner.
That's true. Okay. She just misses him.
Yeah.
Okay.
And also he was like, I don't have time for this kid bullshit. I'm never here. Florence told her father that she had begged Alexander to leave his job, but he refused. Florence was beside herself.
Why won't he leave
the military? I know. Her father did nothing.
Yeah.
He really liked this marriage and was proud of having a decorated army son-in-law. So yeah, his response was basically, cry about it, Flo. And cry.
I give you £1,000 a year.
Yeah.
Find someone else.
Write a letter. You'll be fine. But cry she did, and loudly, for the next 3 years until Alexander eventually did relent and got himself the honorable discharge he never wanted. Florence was pleased. She's like, good, quit, thank you. The pair then moved to a sizable estate in Gloucestershire called Gatcombe Park. Everything's like a park.
Yeah.
Where Florence could ride horses and host dinner parties and balls and wear pretty dresses. Alexander, though, was not pleased. He was bored and miserable. He had been a career soldier, and he suddenly found himself thrown into the leisurely life of an aristocrat. You know how some people just cannot relax? That was Alexander. He tried working in finance, like that was his family business, but it didn't work. And he tried buying and selling gold. That was, Florence's family's business, but that didn't work either. Nothing really seemed to work for him. Alexander was not really into the fancy family man life. He expected to barely see his wife and children while he stayed very far away, busy shooting guns and stomping around in a jungle for the rest of his probably short life. But expectation did not match reality in this case, and Alexander became very depressed. Yeah. Thankfully, everyone knows that the best thing for depression is AA.
Yes.
Alcohol and affairs. And Alexander leaned hard into both. Rumors of Alexander checking into and out of several different hotels at the seaside for very brief stays with an array of strange women began to circulate.
What do you think he was doing?
Probably writing letters.
Probably.
Yeah. Said rumors did not take long to make their way back to Florence, of course, and word was also that Alexander had himself a steady mistress in addition to all of these other side pieces in London's glamorous West End.
No.
So he had a girlfriend and then a bunch of women he just checked in and out of hotels with.
Okay. Busy.
Yeah, real busy.
I mean, he figured out what to do with his time.
Yeah, how to keep himself occupied. Florence confronted her husband, expecting him to lie and scream and defend himself. But Alexander simply admitted all of it. He was like, yeah, I do that.
Yeah.
He didn't beg for forgiveness or apologize, and he certainly didn't stop what he was doing. Instead, he just started drinking very heavily also. And Alexander, as it turns out, was an angry drunk. He'd fight viciously with Florence, screaming and berating her. And when that wasn't enough to quell his resentment, he started hitting her. Before long, Alexander was a seriously physically dependent alcoholic, like needed it to not be sick and die.
Right.
He was killing himself and Florence. But it seemed like that's kind of what he wanted to do.
Mm-hmm.
Florence begged him to stop drinking. She tried to help him, but nothing worked. And this is the point where this story takes a real hard right turn. Because in every other Victorian story of domestic violence, and there are quite a few, women tend to suffer in silence or try to get help and then continue to suffer until they are dead. But Florence wasn't about to let this be how her story ended. She knew it wouldn't be easy, but she decided that she had to get out of her marriage. First, she appealed to her mother. She wrote her a letter, probably in the morning, just saying, explaining this whole horrible situation. There would be no big happy family with this man, which she thought like her mom would really respond to, no grandchildren. Mm-hmm. And she ended the letter by saying that she wanted to seek a gasp separation.
Ooh.
Which was essentially a divorce, but they used the word separation. And divorce was not done back then.
Yeah.
Women on their own also didn't really have any rights. And legally, once they were married, they and every single thing they owned and every dime that belonged to them became their husband's property.
Mm-hmm.
And husbands could do whatever they wanted with their own property, which included punch it in the face or throw it off a cliff.
Yep.
So, but Florence didn't see it that way. After receiving this very disturbing letter, Florence's mother turned it right over to her husband. She's like, I don't know what to do with this. Here. And he was furious. And rightfully so. I think we'd all be mad if a man had been punching our daughter.
Yeah.
But he wasn't mad at Alexander. He was mad at Florence.
Sure.
Right, of course. Mr. Campbell said the suggestion of a separation was out of the question and that dissolving a marriage was morally offensive. Blech. Both parents agreed that they should do everything possible to avoid a scandal. Don't tell anyone you're thinking of this, Florence. And that Florence needed to basically tighten up and learn how to take a punch. I mean, what are mistresses but friends you have yet to meet?
Sure.
Right? And maybe she could start drinking too.
There you go.
Then they'd have something in common.
Okay.
Just saying.
Yeah.
You know, figure it out. Florence did not like this. And honestly, her mother didn't really either. While she definitely did not think Florence should get a divorce, she could see that Florence was right on the verge of a nervous breakdown, and that wouldn't be great for her either.
Mm-hmm.
You know, crazy daughter, no good. Don't want that
Right.
either. Her suggestion was that instead of getting a divorce, Florence should seek psychiatric help.
You mean go to the spa?
Yes, I do exactly mean that. Hysterical women were so trendy. Surely there would be like a rich person version of sending your child away for a little brain rest.
Oh, absolutely.
Perhaps something without all the tuberculosis patients.
Yeah.
I don't know, just spitballing here. That seems nice.
Yeah.
Fortunately, at that moment, Mrs. Campbell remembered an old family friend, Dr. James Gully.
Okay.
Nothing but good names, just hits across the board.
Yeah.
When Florence was a girl, Dr. Gully had treated her for strep throat. And since that time, he had become a homeopathic hydrotherapist to the stars.
Ooh, and renamed Dr. Fern Gully.
You can call him that. Sure. This seemed like just the thing to help Florence stop crying and acting rationally. So Mrs. Campbell called up Dr. Gully and booked Florence a stay at his clinic in Malvern, which was undoubtedly very expensive, and hoped for the best. Now I know what you're thinking. What stars and what the hell is homeopathic hydrotherapy?
I'm not. I know.
Okay, well, I'll tell the fiends out there. Well, Alfred Lord Tennyson, Florence Nightingale, and Charles Darwin, to name a few.
Mm-hmm.
Darwin and Dr. Gully were actually classmates and good friends, and after graduation, Dr. Gully became Darwin's trusted physician. And you guys know what I think of him. They were equally weird. A better second question would be, what kind of hydrotherapy did Dr. Gully practice? Because hydrotherapy, also referred to as the water cure, is a broad and spooky term. It might conjure up images of people sitting in mineral baths and swimming in the sea. Like you said, maybe they were at the spa. Could be nice. Or it might make you think of screaming patients locked in metal tubs of alternating boiling hot and icy cold water against their will.
Yes.
Both are accurate.
That's what it makes me think of.
Yeah, and you're right. Both of those things are right. And both were used to treat mental illness and also every other kind of illness. Everything imaginable way back when. Dr. Gully practiced a little from column A and a little from column B. And it's going to be a real challenge not to laugh when I read this, but here is what a day at his water clinic in the seaside town of Malvern would be like. Now, this is like his itinerary.
Okay.
Dr. Gully's patients at Malvern, this is a quote. Dr. Gully's patients at Malvern were woken up at 5 a.m., undressed and wrapped in wet sheets and then covered in blankets. Great. Why? I don't know. They have to be wet. An hour later, buckets of water were thrown upon the patients, who then went on a 5-mile walk carrying an alpenstock and a Grafenberg flask of mineral water. So 2 big jugs of water. They would stop at wells for water all along this 5-mile walk and just drink. They returned to the Malvern pump room for a breakfast of dry biscuits and more water. Then they had the day to spend bathing in a range of kinds of baths, or in some cases, they just wore a wet sheet called the Neptune girdle around their middle at all times.
Yep.
Only removing it when they ate. Dinner was always boiled mutton and fish, followed by a few hours in a dry bed, because everybody needs a rest. The exercise, plain food, and absence of alcohol, together with the congenial company of other wealthy patrons, proved generally beneficial.
Generally.
Yeah. This is usually okay. Okay. That sounds awful, but the kind of...
awful.
Yeah, but it sounds like the kind of weird awful that people who are not me or you might enjoy.
Sure.
I don't know. Maybe some people like a wet sheet and a long walk.
And mutton and fish.
And
whatever.
Definitely some kind of poison from drinking just groundwater all the time.
It was clean back then.
Everybody's shitting all over the town. I don't know about that. Dr. Gully reminds me a little bit of James Harvey Kellogg.
Oh, yeah.
The cornflake guy. Yeah. Who, oddly enough, strongly contested hydrotherapy, but he loved a yogurt enema for all the same reasons.
Yeah.
Both of these guys were highly respected medical doctors. I could not make that up if I tried. Fortune favors the bold, I suppose. So back to the story at hand. It is now 1870, and off Florence went to the land of wet sheets and boiled mutton for a change of disposition.
Yum.
Generally beneficial.
Yeah. I'm excited for her.
But don't sleep on old dark horse Dr. Gully, because he did not give the Campbells the result they were looking for.
Oh.
Instead of subduing her, Dr. Gully encouraged Florence to move ahead with the divorce.
Okay.
As he saw it, Florence's marriage was literally killing her. Mr. and Mrs. Campbell were pissed when they heard this. Florence, however, was ecstatic, and so was Dr. Gully.
Fern.
During her time at the water cure clinic, Dr. Gully discovered that he quite liked Florence.
Okay.
She was smart and cultured, and her husband was a piece of shit. She wasn't crazy. She was stuck in a bad situation. And if I stopped this story right here, everything would sound downright heroic. But alas, it is not. Because Florence discovered that she liked Dr. Gully as well.
Okay.
Yeah. He was bright and thoughtful, and his opinion on women was vastly different from any she had ever encountered from a man before.
Sure.
Quote, Gully was an articulate and popular public speaker and writer. He was also a firm believer in a number of women's causes. He advocated women's suffrage and preached temperance due to the detrimental effects of alcohol on the husbands of many Victorian women. Gully built 2 clinics, Tudor House for men and Holyrood House for women. That's a hard one to read. He separated the sexes strictly at his clinics, as he believed that many female psychological complaints, such as depression, anxiety, hypochondria, and hysteria, were due to the pressures Victorian women were under to be chaste, ambitionless, efficient, selfless givers at the expense of their own mental well-being.
Okay.
And he was right.
Yeah.
That is very forward thinking. Bravo, doctor. We love this.
Sure. And just splash some water on them and they'll be better.
Walk around a lot, boil your mutton, you're good. Generally beneficial.
Yeah.
Dr. Gully was also really into mesmerism, spiritualism, and diagnostic clairvoyance, which is just having someone with no medical training who claims to be psychic diagnose your patients.
Sure. He's definitely a fern.
Yep. We love this a lot less. Dr. Gully also had some radical theories about marital relations.
Okay.
Namely, that women should enjoy their bedroom activities.
Good.
Not only that, but their enjoyment should be priority number one.
There you go. I like them.
Right? Florence liked that very much. She liked it so much, in fact, that she eagerly accepted Dr. Gully's offer to show her exactly what he meant.
Oh.
Yeah. And he must have been really good at it, because I left a few things about Dr. Gully out. Dr. Gully was not exactly a dashing young soldier like her husband. He was a short, round, balding, 62-year-old man.
Ugh.
And he was married. Yeah, I will remind you that Florence is like 25 at this point. Gentlemen, let this be a lesson about how far a little understanding can go. Really far. During her treatment, Florence and Dr. Gully began a very unlikely secret affair. Sure, it's weird, but he did help a little for a while, right? And he had some good ideas.
Yeah.
Because her parents wouldn't sanction the separation, Dr. Gully assumed temporary guardianship of Florence under the guise of providing her medical care. So as her doctor, he could take temporary custody of her, right? Even though she doesn't really need it, but still. Her father had threatened to cut Florence off financially if she went through with the separation. Alexander begged her to stay, but Florence didn't care. And with Dr. Gully's help, Florence was able to legally separate from her husband in March of 1871.
Ooh.
I cannot stress enough how unheard of and nearly impossible this was. Until 1857, divorce had to be an act of parliament in England, and it was not done by women ever. It was always men. And little did Florence know that had she just waited a little bit longer, this whole messy situation could have been avoided. Because less than a month after their separation, Alexander Ricardo was found dead in a hotel room in Germany.
Ooh.
Yes. Florence was notified by telegram, and it was explained that he was, quote, discovered by a female companion. One of his hoes.
Show.
His official cause of death was hematemesis, triggered by a final alcohol binge, which loosely translated means he got so drunk that he threw up blood until he died. That
Wonderful.
is intense.
Very intense.
Is that possible? Yes. Is it common? No. That is the weirdest version of end-stage alcoholism. But it is possible. We'll talk a little bit more about that and other stuff around it later on. The more pressing question for most people was, why was Florence officially notified of Alexander's death if she and Alexander were no longer married and they had no children together? That's the best part. Drunk, philandering Alexander never got around to changing his will. And when he died, he left 40,000 pounds to Florence. That's over 6 million pounds or $7.3 million in today's currency. Florence was back on top and entering her scandal era.
Yes, girl.
She continued her affair with Dr. Gully in secret, which meant that their relationship was very complicated. Dr. Gully had been married twice, and he knew a thing or two about wealthy widows. His first wife, Frances, with whom he had 2 children, died in 1838. Both of these children, by the way, were more than 10 years older than Florence herself.
Well, she has some friends.
Boy, oh, no, she didn't. They did not know about her or like her once they did. In 1840, Gully remarried a wealthy widow whose name was also Frances.
Okay.
I know. So to avoid confusion, we're going to call her Frances too. She was 17 years his senior. And for those of you doing the math, that means that at this point in our main story, Frances too is 79 years old.
All right.
Which is old for then. But the two of them hadn't been actively married in a long time. According to Dr. Gully, he and Frances too had functionally separated sometime in the 1840s. It sounds like an excuse, but I guess it's confirmed. They lived in separate homes, they had separate lives, but remained legally married for some reason or another, and I'm pretty sure that had something to do with money.
Yeah.
Dr. Gully did, however, promise Florence that once Frances too kicked the bucket, he would marry her and they would move out of the country and live happily ever after. And they would drink gallons of water and have sex all day, and it would be weird and great. In the meantime, they just had to keep a lid on that affair they were having, which they were really bad at.
Okay.
First, Florence moved to South London. She leased the Priory, a sizable mansion with grounds big enough to allow her 2 horses and a stately garden. You know, for when you have your leisure time and you must walk through the garden or ride your horse.
Of course.
Dr. Gully then retired from hydro-quackery and moved to Orwell Lodge, a house that was just a 5-minute walk from the Priory. How convenient.
Oh, that's great. Yeah.
The two did everything together, though they were careful to never spend the night in each other's company. But people still began to talk. And then they made a mistake. A big one. In 1872, Florence was spending a little holiday with her solicitor, Henry Brooks, and his family in Surrey. One afternoon, Mr. and Mrs. Brooks planned to go out for a picnic. Florence said she would rather relax in the house. She probably had things to leisure. I don't know. So Mr. and Mrs. Brooks set off without her. But then it began to rain, so they dashed back home to grab an umbrella. But instead of an umbrella, they found Florence and Dr. Gully having sex on a sofa in their drawing room.
Oh, boy.
Come on, Flo, the drawing room?
Yes.
Oh, you know they were like really freaky too.
Oh, yeah.
Ugh. Mr. and Mrs. Brooks were super mad. And the ensuing shouting match was overheard by all of their servants. And one thing about servants in these Downton Abbey times is that they love to talk.
Yes.
Ugh. This was very hot gossip. So, of course, it spread like wildfire. And essentially, this was back then like finding out that a real housewife was having an affair with Dr. Phil. They were minor celebrities in their own regard, so people were scandalized. It was bonkers. Florence became a social pariah because, of course, they blamed the woman immediately. No one would come to her house for visits or tea.
No.
Not one person.
Not even for 15 minutes?
No, not even 14 minutes. No minutes.
No minutes.
Grocery stores refused to serve her or her servants. They were like, we will not sell you food. Get out of here. All her social invitations were retracted. So people like called her and disinvited her. Well, they couldn't call her, but you know, they sent another letter that was like, don't come. We don't like you. And within a week of the incident, news reached her parents.
Oof.
Dr. Gully tried in vain to silence Henry Brooks with a lawsuit for slander, but he had to abandon it because that was not going to work ever.
Yeah.
Florence's family was incensed. Her parents demanded that she cut all ties and communication with Dr. Gully at once. But since she had millions of her own dollars now, Florence said no. And with that, her family cut her off entirely. Quote, according to Allison Harris, a descendant of Florence's eldest brother, William, her father was incensed and outraged, but also broken by the scandal. Florence's telegrams to her parents and her letters to her sister Edith went unanswered.
Oh.
Yeah. Now, this would have been a swell time for old Frances, too, to shuffle off her mortal coil, but nope, she was going to live forever. Seeing as no one else would speak to them, Dr. Gully and Florence just kind of kept to themselves. They really only had each other at this point. In 1872, they traveled to a spa in a rural Bavarian town. So now they're vacationing together, I guess.
Okay.
But Florence began to feel tired and sick to her stomach all the time. After likely wondering if she had maybe eaten a bad partridge or accumulated too much blood for a little while, Florence finally figured out that she was pregnant.
Oof.
Yeah, an old guy pregnant. And she knew if she had that baby, she might as well leave the country with her without Dr. Gully.
Yeah.
She'd be driven out of town with pitchforks, essentially. She couldn't recover from that. Dr. Gully didn't love this situation either, so he offered up what he considered to be a more logical solution. He could just abort the fetus himself.
Oh, boy.
He was a doctor, and no one would have to know this way. Just a few problems with that plan, though. Not only was the procedure illegal, but it was also unregulated and incredibly unsafe. Women frequently didn't survive. But in spite of the risks, Florence agreed. The surgery did not go well. Florence lost a lot of blood and quickly became very ill. Her head housekeeper, or as Florence called her, her lady's companion, Jane Cox, so Mrs. Cox from the beginning, attended to her around the clock for 6 days and 6 nights. And somehow, Florence survived. But the ham-fisted procedure would have lasting effects on her health. This event ended the physical relationship between Florence and Dr. Gully. She just couldn't do it anymore. He was fine with it, but she was like, no. And I probably wouldn't want that man to touch me after he almost killed me either. The problem was that this affair had cost Florence everyone in her life other than Dr. Gully and Jane Cox. Florence regarded Jane as her best and only friend. They traveled together and spent all their time together, and Jane cared for Florence, whom she called Florrie,
Aw.
and Florence called her Janie. So cute. And Janie cared for her as if she were her own child. Jane knew Florence wanted to mend her relationships with her family and get back into the normal social graces of her community. She just wanted a regular life, and Jane, who hated to see Florrie suffer, knew just how she could get it. In 1874, Jane arranged a series of accidental encounters between Florence and a young barrister named Charles Bravo.
Ooh.
There he is. A barrister is a fancy English lawyer, and they're the ones that get to wear the little hair hats.
Okay, fun.
Yeah, so robe and hat, totally fun.
Yeah.
Jane's late husband had worked for Charlie's partner years ago. So that she knew him kind of through an acquaintance.
Okay.
Jane had only met the young man a few times, but she thought he might be just the thing for her young mistress. He was smart, lively, came from a decent family, and had a good, respectable job. He seemed good. He dressed nice. He was good enough looking. They describe him in multiple accounts as he looked good enough. Which I was like, okay. The Bravos weren't exactly the Ricardos, but they would do in a pinch. And Bravo wasn't actually even Charlie's birth name, though. He was born Charles Delancey Turner. Still a good name?
Yeah.
Not as good.
Sure.
But his father died when he was just a baby, and his mother remarried a man named Joseph Bravo. Charles went to Trinity College and was called to the bar in 1870. He then set up a small practice with a friend. Charlie Bravo was not a work-obsessed soldier either. In fact, he was quite the opposite. He liked being a Victorian gentleman.
Okay.
He aspired to be an aristocrat. He saw himself as a member of the upper class, even though he was much closer to the middle. He dressed smartly, liked to socialize, and was a member of several private gentlemen's clubs with silly names like Boodles. He was a member of Boodles. That was where men gambled and smoked cigars and drank brandy, and I think sometimes there were ladies of the evening. Sure. I don't know. But this was far more in line with the life Florence had always wanted. So that's the kind of husband she wanted, not the soldier kind. Jane's setup worked like a charm. It wasn't long before the two became friends, and quickly their friendship led to a courtship, which in turn led to a proposal of marriage. Charles was taken by Florence and her money.
Mm-hmm.
Really liked that she had money. Before she agreed to marry him, though, Florence felt obligated to tell Charles all about her affair with Dr. Gully. That's a brave one. She thought he would be scandalized, but he just kind of said, well, I'm not perfect either. For the past 4 years, I've had an affair with a married woman, and we fathered a daughter together. So I have a kid. I don't talk to that kid, but I did have one. Okay, cool. This was definitely a nobody's perfect situation. So they agreed to just not count any of that, start fresh with one another.
Cool.
I guess nobody cared about the kid that he definitely had, but whatever. The Bravos, however, were not happy with this engagement. They had heard of Florence before, and they didn't want their son to marry the ruined former heiress. It was not a good look, but Charles told them just to calm down and remember how rich she was. Think about the money that I am going to have in a week. Florence was fine and all, but all he really wanted was her money. So you can imagine how furious he was when he found out he was never going to get it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Because before their wedding would arrive, Florence did a very smart thing. Utilizing the recently passed Married Women's Property Act of 1870, she had her fortune secured in her own name, which meant it would not transfer to Charles when they were married. Can't be letting any random little money-grubbing illegitimate babies try and lay claim to her stuff now, can we?
Mm-mm.
No, of course not. Now, Leslie, can you explain this act a little more for us?
Oh, yes, Holly.
Just off the top of your head.
Yes. Oh, no, I know it well. As
had a
being
feeling.
a married woman, as you are too.
Yes, and having such property.
Yes, you know. So it comes as no surprise, but for most of history, women were seen as no better than livestock. Prior to the Married Women's Property Act of 1870 in the United Kingdom, because we're talking about the UK.
Of course.
Married women had basically no legal rights regarding property ownership. Once a married woman and Holly touched on this before, but we'll recap. Once married, a woman's personal property, including wages, investments, gifts, or inheritances, became her husband's property, while a wife retained legal ownership of her real property, such as land or houses. She could not manage or control it without her husband's consent. This legal doctrine, known as coverture, effectively merged a wife's legal identity with that of her husband's, which made her unable to make contracts, incur debt, or engage in legal proceedings independently. So it's like that Spice Girl song, "When to Become One."
Yeah, just like that.
Yep.
They're British, so they get it.
They do.
Yeah.
The Married Women's Property Act of 1870 was a game changer, allowing married women to retain ownership of wages and property acquired through their own work or inheritance. This legislation granted them a separate legal identity, enabling them to manage, sell, and control their property without their husband's consent. It also protected their property from being used to settle their husband's debts, which was also big.
Yeah.
The Act's passage was the result of persistent campaigning by women's rights advocates, including Barbara Bodicon, maybe? Bodichon,
Sure.
who in 1854 published a brief summary of the laws in England concerning women, and worked tirelessly to reform property laws. The Act laid the groundwork for future legal reforms, culminating in the Married Women's Property Act of 1882, which extended these rights to all property regardless of its source and acquisition time.
Okay.
These legislative changes significantly advanced women's legal status, granting them greater financial independence and autonomy within marriage.
Basically, they just got to be a whole person.
They did.
Pretty nice.
They did. Though some of it still had to be okayed, by the husband. But yeah, it did change things, which is nice. And as we know, Florence was able to set that up before she got married.
Yes, thankfully she was.
Mm-hmm.
And that meant that Florence made sure her big old fortune stayed hers. This was not her first rodeo, and just in case it wasn't her last, she was damn sure holding on to her money.
Yeah.
Because she already knew through experience that money was the only way she was able to live.
Mm-hmm.
So good on her. That was very smart.
So in America, I think it was like 1850, maybe it was 1854. We had like a version of that started, but it wasn't until I think after. Like I think England actually, or the UK did like a better version of it in 1870. And ours came probably closer to like the 1900s.
Yeah, I'm sure.
But in 1854, we had a version of this. And it was this woman in Mississippi who basically won this, I don't know, like won this case because her husband died and a debt collector had come to he was like, well, I need to take assets. And she's like, well, I don't have any other money in there. And she's like, no, we're going to take all this stuff here, including your slaves. And she was like, well, these are I brought these slaves into the marriage. And they were like, no, we're going to take those too. Those are your husbands. And so she went to court in order to be able to keep her slaves. So that's how that act started in America.
America, come on, man. We can't have nice things. Well, as you can probably imagine, this did not go over as well as the whole Dr. Gully had gone with Charles.
Oh, no.
He had an absolute fit, a temper tantrum, if you will.
Man.
Quote, upon finding out, Charles threatened to call the wedding off by saying to her solicitor, Mr. Brooks, damn your congratulations, I've come about the money. Classy. He urged Florence's father to intervene, writing in a letter, quote, I cannot contemplate a marriage that does not make me master in my own house. I cannot sit upon a chair or eat from a table which does not belong to me. Asshole.
No.
Florence was so upset by Charles's behavior that she sought advice from Dr. Gully, who she had remained friends with. And he, quote, advised her not to squabble about the furniture. And he wished her happiness. And Florence took this advice extremely literally. She ultimately agreed to a compromise. She would allow Charles to take over the lease at the priory, as well as all of the furnishings, and then she'd put him in her will. So he would not have to sit upon a chair or eat from a table that didn't belong to him, but he didn't get any money, which I thought was pretty fucking awesome. So she retained control of all her money, took the furniture real seriously. Charles and Florence were married on December 7th, 1875 at All Saints Church in Kensington. Though they looked a perfect couple, their marriage was not a happy one. What a surprise.
What?
Yeah. It did, however, facilitate amends between Florence and her family. So that Christmas, she got together with her family and she apologized for all of the distress she has caused them. And they didn't apologize to her, but still showed up and everybody was friends again. All good. That made Florence happy. And as a married woman, Florence was gradually accepted back into society. So she could have friends again and go grocery shopping and live a normal life.
Okay.
Even though he didn't have the money he wanted, Charles still felt entitled to make all of the decisions for Florence and their household. Florence, on the other hand, had made it clear that he was not entitled to make all the decisions regarding her money and how she spent it. So when Charles started to nag and criticize her about all the extravagances he thought they didn't need, this is absurd, because he said his mother didn't like them, Florence was not very happy. First of all, they could afford it. She did not live beyond her means at all. And second of all, who the fuck cares about his mother?
He's a mama's boy.
Mm-hmm. Quote, Florence had a butler, a footman, a lady's maid, 2 housemaids, a cook, a kitchen maid, 3 gardeners, a coachman, a groom, and a stable boy. A groom is like the head stable boy. In addition to Jane Cox. 2 weeks before the wedding, Charles fired George Griffiths, Florence's coachman of 4 years. So he's been around longer than Charles. Once they were married, Charles pressured Florence to curb expenses, saying that he would fire her lady's maid and that would be Jane, and transfer her duties to another maid, Marianne Keebler. He would also want to dismiss one of the gardeners, landscape the flower beds so that they could fire yet another gardener and sell all her horses.
This is unacceptable.
I know. Florence later stated, quote, I told him that he had no right to interfere in my arrangements. I reminded him that I had always lived within my means and I was accustomed to looking after my own affairs. And she was. She was fine. Charles then became agitated and lost his temper. The first of many heated arguments occurred between the couple. End quote. And from there, things just went from bad to worse. Charles tried to chip away at every single thing Florence loved. He wanted to fire Jane because he didn't like how close she was to Florence. He went back on his agreement to set aside any thought of the affair she had with Dr. Gully and took to mentioning it to Florence all of the time and tormenting her about it. Not only that, but he obsessed over Dr. Gully and said that he needed to destroy him because he lived so close to their home.
Yeah.
Dr. Gully was not really doing anything, I must say. He did still harbor affection for Florence, but he wasn't like around. They weren't doing anything. Florence, who had become afraid of her new husband, obviously, left the priory at this point for a little while and went to stay briefly with her family. During that time, Charles begged and pleaded for her to return, writing her letter after letter. It's really funny how prominent letters are in this story. Promising, quote, if you come back, I will so take care of you that you will never leave me again, just like any good narcissist would. And unfortunately, she did go back. But it wasn't just Florence's money that Charles felt entitled to at this point. He felt entitled to Florence as well. Any time of the day or night, as often as he wanted, and often in degrading and humiliating ways. He liked unconventional sex, but not the kind that made her happy. Quote, shortly after returning to Balham, Florence suffered a miscarriage. She became very weak, was bedridden, and grew depressed. After her doctor recommended a change of air, Florence planned a holiday in Worthing, which was probably a seaside town. They would usually say, go by the sea, get some air. But Charles and his mother opposed the trip because they said it was too expensive. When Florence said she would confront his mother for interfering, Charles lost his temper, shouting, I will go and cut my throat. And then he struck Florence and stormed off. Ooh. What a nightmare. We have talked about men like him before. Afraid that another pregnancy happening like soon after her miscarriage might kill her, Florence, and like she has a lot of trauma around pregnancy. Let's be real. Florence tried to deny her husband's physical advances, but he just forced her to let him in the back door, so to speak, which she did not want or like, but he made her do it anyway. In all likelihood, Florence could not actually carry a child due to the effects of her botched abortion. She was really messed up from that. So she probably just didn't have the ability to carry a pregnancy to term. In March, Quote, Charles told Florence that he felt it was time for her to get pregnant again. Chop, chop. Switch from the back door to the front. By then, she doubted whether she would be able to carry a child to term at all because of reasons that we just stated. But a few weeks later, she telegraphed her parents to inform them that she was indeed pregnant for a second time. And as she feared, the second pregnancy also ended in miscarriage on April 6, 1876, which then brings us to April 18th, the fated day in question. That day, Charles and Florence went to town together, quote, briefly quarreling when their carriage passed Orwell Lodge, that is Dr. Gully's house. They stopped at the bank and at the jeweler's on Bond Street before going their separate ways. Florence went shopping on Haymarket and bought hair lotion and premium tobacco for Charles as a peace offering. Charles went to the Turkish Bath at 76 German Street and met Florence's uncle James Orr for lunch at St. James Hall. Florence was resting in the morning room when Charles returned to the Priory. He then decided to go riding, ignoring the groom. Remember, that's like the head of the horses in stable. Ignoring the groom's warning not to take any of the horses out since they had already been exercised that day. The horse that Charles took out then bolted for 4 miles, taking Charles on a long and unpleasant ride. Not undeserved, but whatever. When he returned, Charles was stiff and tired. According to the butler, Frederick Rowe, Charles was in great pain and looked exceedingly pale. Florence said she had to help him to his feet when his bath was ready. At dinner, Charles was extremely irritable toward both Florence and Jane Cox, complaining that he was sore from the horse ride and that a previous toothache had returned. During the meal, Charles was angered to receive a letter from Joseph Bravo criticizing him for playing the stock market. His stepfather had opened a letter from Charles's stockbroker showing that he had sold shares at a loss. Oh, and Charles also loved to gamble and could never hold on to the little money that he brought home himself. But his wife's life was too extravagant, paying people that she had kept under her employ for a great many years. Great. Before going to bed, Charles went to Florence's bedroom to scold her in French, snobby, for drinking too much that day, as she had since the miscarriage. So after her second miscarriage, she started drinking a lot. And that day she had champagne at lunch, a bottle of sherry at dinner, and asked for a glass of wine upstairs after she had gone up for bed. Bottle of sherry is a lot. And now we are back to where we began. So why did the doctor think Charles had been poisoned? And what had he been poisoned with? Leading up to his death on April 21st, 1876, Charles was seen by 6 doctors.
Wow.
Including one of the most highly regarded physicians in England, the Queen's own physician and Jack the Ripper suspect, Dr. William Gull. I saw his name and I was like, what are you doing here? At first, they thought maybe he had been given chloroform or arsenic, but they couldn't find traces of either one of those things. Then, for a brief time, Charles woke up and had a very strange story to tell. They asked him, what did you take? What happened? What was your day like? He said he had taken a bit of laudanum for a toothache, so he put it in his mouth, swished it out, and accidentally swallowed some. Sorry, Charlie. Laudanum is a tincture of alcohol and opium, and the poors would drink it by the bottle at that point in time. A little dash accidentally swallowed wasn't going to do anything more than maybe make him a touch more sleepy.
Sure.
Maybe not even that. At this point, Mrs. Cox then pulled the doctors aside and told them quietly that when she found Charles, after he threw up all over the roof, he said, I have taken poison, don't tell Florence. Okay. But what had he taken and why? And why didn't she say something earlier? What is going on? After his passing, we know he dies. Dr. Gull, maybe the Ripper, determined that Charles had died of antimony poisoning. Antimony was the only substance that could have fit the bill in his mind. And when Charles's body was autopsied, quote, the postmortem concluded that Charles had indeed ingested 30 to 40 grains, 10 times the lethal dose of tartar emetic, a derivative of antimony. Doctors suspected that his death had been suicide, and to this day, they do not know precisely how or when he took all that poison. So what the hell is antimony? Well, you know I get excited when we have a new poison to discuss.
Yay.
And this is Antimony's We Would Be Dead debut.
Ooh.
I know. Antimony is arsenic's silver cousin. little silver fox of the poison world.
Okay.
Or a brittle, lustrous, silvery white metal that occurs naturally in the Earth's crust.
Okay.
So it's similar to arsenic, it's just not green. It's used in many products, including batteries, solders, and flame retardants. It's pretty, but deadly. In the Victorian era, it was often used medically as a treatment for leishmaniasis and other tropical diseases brought back by English soldiers who were tromping around in the jungle. It was also an incredibly powerful emetic, which means it was really, really good at making people barf. It was most commonly taken in one of two ways. The first was a reusable pill. That's right, you'd swallow it and throw it up, wipe it off, and then pass it on to the next person. It's like a little metal pill. In like ancient times, they used to have, because this substance has been around forever, they had something called an antimony cup where they would put wine in it, let it sit overnight, and then if you drank the wine, it would make you throw up.
Okay.
Poison metal. Go figure. Or, if you were a wimp, you could use a substance called tartar emetic. One would take a very, very tiny amount of this odorless, tasteless powder, and then bingo, barfo, everything comes up. So why would you want to do this to yourself?
Right.
Well, the Victorians, first of all, thought that purging was an excellent cure for a lot of things. Had to get those toxins out somehow and all the weird smells and demons or whatever. But tartar emetic was generally seen as a little too powerful for your garden variety barfing. However, it was used frequently in those days as a cure for severe alcoholism. Mostly it was prescribed to women whose husbands had taken enthusiastically to drinking. Conventional wisdom of the time said if you put it in all of their cocktails, so every time they drank, they would violently throw up, and eventually they wouldn't want to drink anymore. Right? Okay. Kind of a conditioning, right? Or they would die. And if they died, it might look like vomiting blood until they died or something close to that. I don't know. I'm just a podcast host. I wonder who that sounds like. Who threw up blood until they died?
I don't know.
Oh, me neither. The point is, the substance wouldn't have been considered illegal. It wasn't that hard to get a hold of, but they really couldn't find it. And if you did ask for it, no one would think you were using it for murder. They were like, that's just the medicine.
Okay.
Moving on. Quote, 2 inquests were held and the details were considered to be so scandalous that women and children were banned from the courtroom while Florence Bravo testified. Because mind you, Florence was then forced to speak openly about everything. Her affair with Dr. Gully, her first marriage, her abortion, her abuse, the miscarriages, the backdoor banging, everything.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. The first inquest returned an open verdict, which means, I don't know. The second inquest returned a verdict of willful murder. But no one was ever arrested. They were like, he was murdered. We don't know who did it. The end. Okay? Which also, I guess, could be translated into he could have done it himself as well. And now for the fun part. If no one officially knows what happened, what do they think happened? Because they had thoughts.
Right.
A few people think somehow, some way, Dr. Gully did it. I think they just like that plot line, really. Even though he did have an airtight alibi, and he was nowhere near the Priory that night. Like, he was proven to be at home by the people that worked in his house, but people still want to think that he did it. And you know what? If it's true, if he did do it, good on you, Gully. I get it. He was awful. But I don't think it was. Some people think it was the stable boy, the groom, who was angry about getting fired. And not a lot of proof on that one either. But okay.
That one seems dramatic.
Yeah, this is all dramatic. But most people think one of 3 things happened. Either Florence did it, Jane did it, or perhaps the most fun and widely believed of all, Charles did it himself, but by accident.
How?
So, let's go through the situations. If it was Florence, let's say if it was Florence. Florence had every reason to commit this crime. I don't think we have to go over all of her reasons. Frankly, if she did it, who could blame her? So, how did she do it and when? If she did it. It has been suggested that Florence was given tartar emetic to try and cure her first husband's violent alcoholism.
Okay.
But it didn't work. She did, however, witness its effects and knew full well that it had the potential to be pretty dangerous. Normally, she and Charles shared a bedroom, so she knew that he kept a carafe of water on his dressing table that he drank directly from overnight. Florence could have slid the undetectable substance into this carafe when she returned home from her errands and Charles was still out, or during his long, bumpy horse ride. But people tend to believe it was in the morning that she did this and that when he got changed for the horse ride, he drank a little of that water, which is why he felt so sick afterwards and he was a cranky mess at dinner.
Mm.
And then he would have gone up to bed for the evening, gotten changed, and drank a whole bunch more of that tainted water. And within 15 minutes, he would have begun violently vomiting because antimony is very fast acting. The problem with this theory is that a couple of the doctors that attended to Charles had also had a little of the water from that same carafe sitting on his bedtime table. They just took a little sip of it.
What?
So weird and stupid and gross. I can't believe that happened, but it is in police reports. They did it. It was mentioned more than once that it was very uncommon for a person to not pour their bedside water into a glass from a carafe, and everyone thought it was kind of gross that Charles drank right from the bottle. But even if the doctors didn't think they were drinking backwash, they still immediately suspected he was poisoned and then drank something out of his room.
Right.
What are you doing?
So wild.
Why would you ingest anything in that room? I wouldn't even touch anything. Antimony, much like arsenic, could also go right through your skin. Like, come on, man.
Right.
All right. Another theory that still involves Florence is that she had Jane put the antimony into the wine that she had served only to Charles that evening at dinner. He drank a glass of red, but Florence drank sherry.
Right.
Afterward, the glass had been washed and put away, so there would be no evidence. This would mean that both Florence and Jane were guilty. But maybe Florence had nothing to do with it. Maybe Jane did it on her own.
Mm-hmm.
So if it was Jane, the second theory is that Jane did this of her own volition. Some people heard that earlier that day, Charles had tried to fire Jane. He went to her privately and was like, "You're fired, you gotta go." And she was like, "What the fuck? I've been with her forever and I set her up with you. This is messed up." Jane was furious. Not only was she furious that Charles would do something like this to her, knowing full well that it was against Florence's wishes, but she also saw that he kind of had something coming to him. She hated the way that he treated Florence. She was beside herself that Florence had been so ill and abused and upset. She knew what was going on behind closed doors because remember, she was there all the time. And she knew that one divorce had nearly destroyed Florence. She would never survive another. She was the one who set up Florence and Charles Bravo as well. So she felt very responsible for this. As far as methodology, because we know why she'd do it, pretty obvious. How? First, it was suggested that she put it in his bedside water. Everybody was really into it being in that water carafe, which is nuts because they drank it. Like other people drank it. So then they pivoted to okay, well, probably it was that wine at dinner thing, but it just wasn't instructed by Florence. Jane decided to do it herself. Personally, I think that putting it into his wine is really the only option if we're going with murder because he did drink the whole glass.
Yeah.
The glass was served to him by other people and then it was washed. And they couldn't find evidence of the poison anywhere else.
Okay.
And they tested all the other things. The doctors drank the fucking water.
Right.
So it really had to be that wine, in my opinion.
Okay.
And this poison is very strong. Nobody's taken even a sip of it and just being fine afterwards. They would have felt poorly in one way or another. So that's how Jane would have done it if it was Jane. Obviously, she's serving them. It would have been very easy. But let's say it was Charlie himself and it's not suicide.
Yeah.
This is my favorite. It was long suspected that Charles Bravo had been trying to gradually poison his wife himself.
Oh.
He showed clear contempt for her and had been less than subtle about the fact that he married her for money that he did not have access to.
Right.
But he would get that money if Florence happened to die. Because remember, as part of her compromise, she put him in her will.
Yep.
After failing to produce an heir, because if she had his baby, he probably would have a little more control there as well, but that didn't work. Charles saw no other option but to kill Florence. And she did have kind of an alcohol habit herself, so there is some theories that maybe Charles would have been able to just get that medication from any doctor because he said he wanted to, cure his wife of her drinking habit.
Mhm.
But the problem with that is that he didn't really seem to do that. No doctors in the area had prescribed the substance. Now, they said they didn't, but also there was no record of it anywhere. And no pharmacies in the area had supplied antimony to anyone in recent times.
Yeah.
So they were like, no, it didn't come in from anywhere. He definitely didn't do that. But maybe Florence just had some left over.
That's what I was going to say. Maybe like...
It was in their medicine cabinet.
Yeah.
This would explain why Florence herself had been feeling miserable and had had a really hard time recovering from her latest miscarriage. This is a well-documented fact. She was ill for weeks after that.
Okay.
On the night in question, Charles would have gone to bed and put some laudanum in his mouth for the toothache that he did in fact have. But instead of spitting it out, he accidentally just swallowed. And then he panicked. For whatever reason, he thought that a small amount of laudanum might poison him to death. A fact that he seemingly confirmed by repeatedly insisting it. He just kept saying, I think it was the laudanum. So, to correct his own mistake, he reached for an emetic to make himself throw up. But instead of a garden variety emetic like Ipecac, he misread the label and grabbed the tartar emetic and took a whole lot of it. Ipecac will make you throw up a whole lot, but it's a botanical, not a heavy metal, and a total horse of a different color. So if he had taken a bunch of this powder, put it in his water drink, whatever he did with it, and it was Ipecac, he would have just thrown up.
Mm-hmm.
It's not the case with antimony. This would explain his alleged confession to Jane. I took a bunch of poison, don't tell Florence. Oh, I took a bunch of this barfy stuff, don't tell her, that's why I'm throwing up, I'll look stupid. And this would also explain why in his waking moments before death, he said very little when questioned about what he took and insists that it was only laudanum that he had taken that night. Because if he had admitted to having the tartar emetic, he'd have to tell them why he had it or why he knew what it was. And besides, he may have never even realized his mistake because he didn't take it on purpose. So,
wow.
Yeah, it is widely suspected that he accidentally overdosed on medicine he tried to kill his wife with.
But then going back to what you were saying before, they couldn't find traces of it anywhere.
They found it in his body.
But I know, but not in the cup, like in his drinking water or anything like that.
No, because, well, the supposition in this case is that it was in some sort of container, some garden variety pill container or whatever, and he just downed the powder. He just was panicking and took some himself. And then he could have done anything with that bottle. To be frank, they didn't investigate very well. Okay. He could have thrown it out the window in his barf. He could have had a servant put it in the trash. It could have gone, they just didn't do a good job looking. And the vials for this specific type of powder are like little tiny glass vials.
Okay.
So
maybe he took the powder and then drank water.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. And then washed it down and then was it could have, if he did it himself, that was the way. Personally, I kind of think that it was Jane.
I think that makes the most sense.
Yeah, I don't think Florence would kill a husband herself. She was definitely in situations where things were bad enough to want to do that, but I don't think that she would. I also think that perhaps her previous husband, that had accidentally contributed to his death. I don't think that it did on purpose, but I think that she kind of saw that it may have.
Yeah. Well, and I also wonder if, because that day she bought gifts for him as a
peace
offering. And that could have set Jane off to be this, she's never going to leave him. And
well, she knew that also she couldn't leave him. She literally couldn't because her family would have disowned her again. She would have been ostracized again. She would have had no place to go. And it would have been really awful for her to have another, but as it was terrible for her in the aftermath. Sadly, quote, after the inquest ended and the twice widowed Florence moved away to Southsea, Hampshire, she died at 33 of alcohol poisoning 2 years later on September 24th.
It's so wild. She's so young.
Mm-hmm.
But she had those other complications too.
She did. She had quite a time.
Yeah.
But I don't think she killed her husband.
I don't think so either.
I really don't. In my opinion, the most fun explanation is that he's such a douchebag that he accidentally killed himself, which I also think is possible. I think he could have done that. I also think that he had enough arrogance and pride that even if he realized what he'd done, he never would have admitted it.
Right.
Because there was no fixing it. There was nothing they could have done to fix it.
Yeah. I also wonder if there was something to like that, him riding the horses that day, if there was something that also happened, like maybe he got some sort of injury in his like stomach because of that, plus like taking something.
Well,
like,
when he
I
was
don't know.
autopsied, that's the other thing I didn't really go into too much. They found the antimony, and they also found the effects of the antimony. So he had been suffering for days, which means it ate away at his stomach lining and bowels. So it was it had eaten through his insides, because this is very caustic. It's it's an extremely poisonous material. Yeah. And so it was like there were ulcers all over in his stomach and like perforated things. So it was very clearly caused by the antimony, but I guess something had happened, you wouldn't have seen it. Florence thought, at one point she said to the cops that she thought he had had a heart attack while he was out on the horse, and that's why he didn't feel well and he collapsed later, which makes sense. That's not a stupid thing to say. You could have some sort of event like that, or like an aneurysm or something, and like not know it until later. But again, I go back to the fact that he was autopsied and they found just decimation from the antimony. So
yeah,
I don't know.
Awful.
Yeah. And that is the story of Charles Bravo.
That's wild.
Isn't that crazy?
What a life. What a life of Flo.
I know.
Good
Flo
old-
had quite the time, man.
Florence.
I feel
Florence Pugh.
not. Oh God, don't wish that upon
No.
poor Florence Pugh. Yeah, I feel bad for her.
Me too.
That was like a terrible situation, and that stupid older man. If she had just stayed away from him.
I know.
He did help her get that divorce. However, I think her husband was going to die one way or another.
Or if she just like let him be in the army.
Yeah, that's another thing. Like I think he just fell off the rails because he was so depressed about quitting his job.
Yeah, and like probably lost his identity. I mean, it doesn't excuse how he then
of course
acted, but like I almost wonder if he was just like, I'll stay in the army, but I'll give time for us to try to have children. If that would have, I mean, maybe they had those conversations.
I don't know. Yeah, there isn't much about that except for he was just like very absent and distracted and didn't have time for living the life that Florence wanted to live. And she was 19. She was like a kid. So of course she was like, this isn't what I wanted.
I know. That's the other thing. It's like she wanted that romance.
And,
yeah.
And he probably courted her in a way that made her think that's what she was going to have.
Yeah.
And then she just didn't get it.
And then she was alone.
Yeah. And it was depressing. And
we've watched a lot of shows and movies like that.
Mm-hmm. And she was forced to like leave her family. She had a big family, which would also explain why she immediately hired 1 million staff members, because she didn't want to be alone.
Yeah. Oh, man.
I know. Sad times for Flo.
Yeah.
But it was really fucking cool that she got divorced and protected her money.
Yes.
So
smart.
Yeah. I don't know who ended up with it in the end.
I know. I wondered that too. I mean, maybe it went back to the family.
Probably.
Maybe Jane.
That would be the best. It'd be awesome if it had been Jane.
Yeah.
I like her.
Yeah.
I like Jane Cox. She was like a hardy middle-aged woman that was like stomping around and taking care of shit too.
Yeah.
We love one of those.
Love that.
Mm-hmm. I think she did it. And good for her, man. God, protect your girl.
Yeah. Woo. Well, thank you, Holly.
Yeah. Anytime. Toast?
Toast to Jane.
To Jane. Hell yeah. And Flo.
And Flo. Flo. Wait, what would they call her? Flory?
Yeah, Jane called her Flory.
Flory.
That's cute.
That's cute.
And like nobody else.
Yeah. To Dr. Goley for putting women first.
For a time. Except for his old wife.
Yeah. Well, she might have just been tired.
To the old wife. 79 and the start of this, and she did not die.
Yeah.
Just trucking along, rich as hell in her own house.
Yeah.
Living the dream, really.
Yeah.
Okay. And if we were filthy rich widows with unfortunate taste in men, we would be dead.
Thank you for listening to the We Would Be Dead podcast. Hit subscribe now to never miss an episode.
Rate and review our show on iTunes. Follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Would Be Dead Pod. And join our Facebook group to discuss the podcast and more.
Someone write her a letter.
Yeah. But it'll have to wait till morning because I'm done writing letters now.
Right, of course. That's morning work.
Yeah.